Most of us, I'm sure, felt the compulsive reactions and feelings when ChatGPT and other seemingly magical AI services were launched a couple of years ago. Excitement, anxiety, fear, overwhelm, doubt, skepticism, even denial were dominating leadership conversations all around the world. Now, as we enter a new, hopefully calmer phase of experimenting, learning and building using these new capabilities, leaders are settling back into recognizing that, as with every new disruptive technology, their first priority is to ask the right questions of themselves, their teams and the organization. In this show, we talk to the highly experienced software engineer Damien Lowe, who works in one of the world's leading AI enterprise companies, about his thoughts on those questions. Tune in for an important conversation on The Evolving Leader. Welcome to The Evolving Leader, a show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable and more human leadership to confront the world's challenges. I'm John Gomes, and today I'm feeling really open and energized because on today's show we are joined by Damien Lowe. We've had several guests talking to us about the impact of AI, what it's having and what it will have in our world, but today we're talking to someone who's right in the middle of the work. Damien is an experienced senior software engineer working at Symphony AI, a fast-growing company that provides enterprise-wide solutions to corporates using generative and predictive AI. I met with Damien last year and exchanged thoughts about what it means to be human in an automated world, and I thought he'd be a brilliant guest for The Evolving Leader. So, Damien, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Primarily, I'm feeling excited. This is a fascinating area. It's new, although it's not new. Its impacts are obviously getting bigger and bigger at the moment in the 20s. So, just very excited to explore all these areas.
Wonderful. So we have talked, at a fairly conceptual and strategic level about AI on the show before. And then just love to get the programmer's perspective. And remember, I represent, part of the audience who are usefully ignorant on this topic. So, break it down for me in simple terms. But can you share, from a starting point, how AI has shaped your career, where you started, at the beginning of your career to today? How has it kind of changed how you think about things and the nature of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how many people understand how long AI has actually been being used out there in the corporate world and probably in governments as well, just in the world in general. As you're probably aware, AI, machine intelligence, machine learning has been an area of research for many decades, way back into the 20th century, right? And that's sort of represented by a lot of the science fiction books that came out in the 20th and films in the 20th century that were exploring the ideas. So we've been trying to come up with some sort of machine level of intelligence for a long time, but up until I think really the 2010s, there were many blocks to actually making it work and make that much of a difference. A lot of those were compute power hardware blocks. But I'm being rough here, but around about the beginning of the 2010s, there were some crossover points in terms of affordable compute power for companies to harness. And much of that was also moving into the cloud more. So companies, organizations didn't need to be doing things locally. They could sort of offload the processing to companies that specialized in that. So your result was what is now called AI and wasn't called that so much in the earlier days has gradually infiltrated into society. So a lot of things like recommendation engines, if you different television and streaming platforms, how do they know what they think you're going to like to watch next? That's a form of AI and machine learning. Same sort of thing for retail, purchasing recommendations, all sorts of analytics and business intelligence stuff. So it's actually been going on for a long time. And one could argue that AI goes right the way back to the start of programming, but I didn't see it much until roughly the end of the noughties, beginning of the 2010s, where I started to be involved in various ways with what would be called predictive AI and analytics, and as data volume started to scale up. We're talking early teenies. And yeah, looking at large statistical models run on large data sets, just pulling out insight, particularly when I was working in trying to counter financial crime. That was one of the big areas that I was involved with. And it's just scaled up and up and up. Nowadays, I work for a company, as you know, that specializes in AI for the enterprise. We use AI to help ourselves write code to write better AI. It's everywhere now, and we use it for research or just to have a chat.
How's it changing your job? I mean, how do you think about your work now compared to when you started out?
So again, if I look at the evolution, when people say, "Oh, I'm going to Google that," they've been using AI for years. So just the fact you can search for things. If I think back to the dark ages when I started programming professionally, Google did exist, but it was quite primitive. Nowadays, I can just go on to one of these LLMs like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot. I certainly tend to use the GPT models in preference to search engines all the time now, because I want to have context-aware conversations about what I want to search for, and because I can refine my search in real time in context with the machine, right? So I can say, oh, that's not quite what I meant. I meant this. Just that is a huge step forward from you just type a search prompt into Google, and if you didn't write a prompt very well, or if something relevant wasn't available, you might just get nonsense. So that is a time saver just in and of itself, and that's kind of just the beginning of things. As a professional software developer, I can actually get the machine to start suggesting code, reviewing code, suggesting tests, doing all sorts of things that are very useful and potentially time-saving. I use my words carefully.
Have you got any sense of, like if there was a Damien Lowe pre-ChatGPT versus what it can do now to help you with your productivity? Is that 2x, 5x, 10x potential? What's your productivity like compared to without it?
I'd love to tell you that it was 2x or 5x. Realistically, I don't think it is. I think there has been an improvement. We are actually trying to measure that in our company, which itself is proving quite difficult. But we have gained some metrics, and we do reckon there's some improvement for programmers and other, not just programmers, but across the board. But it's probably more like 10 to 20% at the moment. I don't think that's because it's not very good. I think it's because it's not mature yet. The technology is not mature, and our human response to the technology is not fully adapted either.
That's really interesting, because my, understanding of this is out of step with that experience. Because I, like you read this, news about the amount of programming that's now done automatically versus programmer work and so on, and you hear these huge numbers. So it sounds like that's not quite like the reality. But it's like it's a couple of years since ChatGPT was launched and ignited the public awareness, and all the executives that we were working with all got very fired up in lots of different ways. What's your sense of where we are in the hype cycle then? What's the impact it's had in there, not just in terms of impact, but the awareness part of it, the human and the machine side of it?
If one sets a basic or perhaps medium level complexity programming task, or indeed several other technical type tasks, research tasks, to these GPT models at the moment, they will often come back with a perfect or very good answer quite quickly, which can potentially save a lot of time. That's excellent. A running theme I've seen amongst us software developers and other professionals involved in complex areas is there's some sort of complexity threshold. But if you go beyond that, the results can change from being perfect or good to being mediocre at best, and sometimes much worse. And the change can be very quick. And I think there are reasons that are increasingly becoming understood as to why that's happening in the way these models function and in the way that they're trained and what they're trained on as well. There are quite a lot of factors. But there are clearly lots of potential ways in which there could be lots of money and time savings with this technology. I don't know if always the C-suite understands that the road to get there might actually make some things take longer before they take less time. Again, because we've got work to do on the quotes machine side and on the human side.
Talk to me a bit about the human side. What do not just programmers, but people in general need to do to start adapting to be in some sort of partnership with AI?
To some extent, one could simply answer with become better prompt engineers. And that's sort of true. And there is training available for doing that. And that is worth doing. And it's probably worth for some organizations paying money to get training like that rolled out. But I think there's more than that. Again, I think understanding how the machines, quote, think versus how we think is very, very useful. And a lot of the time, something the machines have taught me and the way they interact with humans is that a lot of humans don't understand the way they think very well in the first place. Therefore, when they're presented with something that thinks in a way that's better in some ways and potentially worse in other ways, they don't know what to do with that. I've asked a simple question. Why didn't I get a simple answer? Or why didn't I get a factual answer? Or why didn't I get a consistent answer? Asking better questions, working on one's own thinking communication style, improving mental clarity, and getting a better sense for what the machines are doing and what they're not doing, as well as just experience using them, right? All of those things help. I mean, I certainly get a lot more out of using GPT models than I did 2 years ago when I'd just come across them. I know what they can't do much better, so I know what to not waste my time on.
So give us a sense of a few of those things. What should we not be wasting our time on?
It depends on the specialist area, because, and this is one of the things that I made sure to check before this conversation, and as I'd suspected, it's definitely the case that the original training set of data that these GPT, I don't want to get hyper technical, but this is very relevant, right? GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer Model, right? So generative is, yes, it can generate new text, new ideas potentially, or assimilate from other ideas in a unique way. Transformer is the technical mathematical modeling that's going on that we don't need to worry about as end users particularly, but pre-trained is very important. Although the models are adaptive to some extent, the bulk of their learning is done in the early stage of their creation. They can be, so to speak, pre-trained successively, but it takes a long time and a lot of money, because that's what takes the huge compute power, right? So it's not happening every day. It might happen every 6 months or a year or something. The rest of the changes, they're happening in smaller chunks. It's more like tweaking than fundamental retraining. So understand, are you working with a generalized GPT model? So your Microsoft Copilot, your Google Gemini, your ChatGPT, they are trained, roughly speaking, on a cross-section of the entire internet at a period of time. It might be 1 or 2 years ago, right? So they don't necessarily have specialist knowledge, but you can enhance them. You can add extra knowledge sources at different stages in model development. So yeah, if you're trying to ask about a very specialist area where there might be general or almost no knowledge just on the internet at large that's publicly available, you may get anything up to nonsense out of the model, but it'll display the same level of confidence as with everything else. And I think a lot of us have seen that. Be aware of that. Now, if it's something you could have probably got something useful with a general Google search, you'll probably be okay. But yeah, specialist knowledge, different situation. I think one of the major issues with these models as they are at the moment, and I'm sure a lot of these things will continue to improve, but yeah, I think one of the major issues is they don't know when they don't know what they don't know. They don't have a sense of that, because the entire way they work is to simply find the highest probability answer based off all the information they have. They're pre-training huge amount of data, and then whatever extra bits has been added. They just get a probability, find the highest probability, and then start producing stuff based on that.
Yeah. Well, human tendency to kind of project human values and humanize the technology means that we start to think of it as a human being and then expect things that it can't possibly do.
Absolutely.
Do you notice that at all in your own dealings with it? You know, do you find yourself sometimes kind of falling into that trap?
Actually, not that much, but that's just because I've got a very keen sense of what it is I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
And I've spent ages deliberately trying to trip it up and find its limits. Yeah. And I keep a very close tab on how it evolves, but I don't expect the general public to do that.
No.
But this business about making specialized models is really important, though, because if it's in one's own company or organization, there are ways that are not that difficult to hugely enhance the specialist knowledge that a model has. You can use the sort of off-the-shelf general internet trained knowledge and add your own knowledge sources from your own organization.
Yeah.
Because that could potentially unlock an awful lot more value.
What's the starting point for how you go about doing that?
Identify how much knowledge you have actually got inside computers somewhere. Is it actually written down and saved on computers? If in some areas it might be hard copy books or printouts of things, get them scanned in. OCR is very good nowadays, so one can scan large amounts of documentation. But a lot of stuff is in computers somewhere. Find it. It might be worth paying for some specialists to actually grab that information and get it into a form that it can be added to GPT models. But basically, if the information is already in a database, it's not that difficult to add it to GPT models.
What's the consideration around the security of that? So you put your own kind of intellectual property as a company or as an individual into one of these models. How confident are we that you retain control over that? That it doesn't just get pulled back into the into the mothership at some point?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very important question. And the biggest thing there is likely going to be how much of the model are you going to pull in-house? Because it is now possible to take some of the open source models that are similar to ChatGPT. They're not quite as good, but they're similar, but they're freely available. You can take those models, pull them in-house. So they've already had their large pre-training done.
Yeah.
Right? Then you can pull them in-house and entirely closed door, add your own data sources to them that you could keep entirely outside the cloud, outside the public internet, therefore secure. Or you could do a halfway house and still be using cloud compute to do a lot of this, which you might need because you can't afford that much compute in-house, but you can pay for quite a high level of security in the cloud explicitly. We actually do that sort of thing in Symphony AI. We actually have our own in-house models and in-house model augmentation, but we're still hosting in cloud, but yeah, in very secure cloud. So that would then mean it's pretty much the same security as any other corporate or organizational IP that uses cloud hosting, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. So can we change the conversation a little bit and
Sure.
kind of open it up to your thoughts on what AI's proliferation is going to lead to potentially, perhaps starting in the workplace? What might work look like in 3 to 5 years' time if companies like Symphony AI are successful in scaling their offerings and getting adopted, as the kind of de facto standard for like Word is?
Yeah, so this is very hard to predict, but in terms of positive best guess, I do think within 5 years, a number of jobs, could get significantly easier, particularly where you've got high complexity. Even if the machines can't do all of it for us, their ability to augment our capabilities, I think, is going to increase more and more. Again, as the models get better and as humans understand how to exploit them better and critically collaborate with them better. I think best case scenario, we get to do less grunt work and be more creative and get more ideas from the machines.
We're starting to see some, interesting research being done in academic circles around the impact that co-pilots are having with different levels. And some of that's counterintuitive in terms of the productivity gains can be made in lots of different parts of the economy, from low skilled workers right up to the kind of highest forms of knowledge work and so on. But at every level, you've got have this self-awareness of what you're working with and what it can do. What are you seeing in terms of the challenges to help leaders, enable their workers and their teams to kind of ensure that becomes a productive relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. That it's also something that we've partially covered some of that already. Actually, coming back to this business about, well, don't think that AI is human. It's not human. It kind of thinks, but not in the same way we do. Better in some ways, worse in others, and it's changing. And also my point, before about how depending on complexity levels and relevant knowledge level in the pre-training of the model, that the AI response could go from being very useful and time-saving to producing nonsense just in an absolute flash. That can be a surprise for people who haven't come across that, don't know what to do about it, or when to just abandon it. So getting more experience with the tools, very important. Asking better questions, very important. Finding the limits. For your domain, you or perhaps some leaders representing you, depending on who you are, what you're trying to do, the complexity of the task, I think it's worth investing some time in testing the limits of the models you're going to use in a domain. Perhaps if a small group of people did that up front, if a particular model with particular pre-training was being brought into an area, that might save a lot of time, for the general working population that was trying to use it. And then, because training could probably be rolled out to some extent. And I have experimented with this myself, to some extent, these GPT models can train us on what they can do if one asks the right questions, right? That is possible to an extent. And again, I see a back and forth. I ask the machines questions and I ask them to ask me questions. So they learn from me, I learn from them. That's the way I see it, which is part of my collaborative point, right? I know a lot of people don't do that, but I've found a lot of use from that. Because they have a certain amount of self-knowledge, right? And they have a lot of knowledge about a lot of things. I always know that if it's an LLM, large language model, which is what all the big, your ChatGPT and things, they are all large language models, right? Which have been trained on at least the whole of the internet at one point. In a lot of areas, they know far more knowledge than I will ever know in my entire life. But they are knowledge strong, wisdom light at the moment. So work out what they know and where they'll break. Then you can avoid problems.
Yeah, so just blowing this question up kind of even further to a kind of more philosophical and moral level, one of the things that we're really interested in the Evolving Leader is how do we make work more, not less human, particularly as automation and other these technologies start to grip. Because if we think about what's happened with, with the proliferation of social media and other technologies, people tend to react to them and adapt in some unusual, unforeseen consequences. So, people's spatial reasoning and ability to read maps and know where they are in situations and pay attention to the journey they're on has switched off because of their GPS system in their car. And similarly, we've become more prone to multitasking and therefore feel worse because we're constantly shifting forwards from task to email and back to task and so on. How do we avoid doing that and lose, we don't lose our souls and our minds as we start to defer to AI? What's your big picture thoughts on that?
Take time away from machines and tech. take some time to walk out in the woods and look at the sky. If you're into meditation, mindfulness, things like that, I think that's an excellent thing. I think it's an excellent foil in general. Certainly something I do regularly and have done for a long time. Or something like, walking, running, swimming, exercise, which is good for us anyway. Or playing a musical instrument, something that is really engaging, that has got nothing to do with technology, and remind us of ourselves. I think being involved with things like that is good for our health.
So what else do you think about in terms of the future of AI? What else should we be talking about?
At the moment, I see what we're doing as still building better tools. Fundamentally, there's still knives and hammers. They can enable us to do more things in the world, to build things and solve certain problems, and potentially make things better for people in society in some ways. But like all tools, right, they have dangers and downsides as well. Knives are great for cutting up your food, but you can cut your own hand off with them, right? I mean, there are sort of equivalents to all that sort of thing. And great power and great responsibility, all of those things still apply. I don't think there has been an AI revolution. I think there is a continuing AI and machines in our world in general evolution. And it's a great headline to say, machines are suddenly sentient and there's been a step change in everything. It's looked like that might have happened for a while, but not really. It doesn't mean that might not happen, but it might happen so slowly we never quite notice, right? I think they can make our lives better in a lot of ways, but we need to remember our humanity and remember that we're animals like other animals, and all of that type of stuff.
If you were talking to a group of 12-year-olds at school about what you've learnt and what you think they need to understand, they're just embarking on the later stage of education, their first jobs, what would your advice be to them?
Stay open, stay curious, learn from machines just as they learn from you. Keep focused on your heart as well as your head. It's very easy to lose that and lose our connection to nature. And something that I do think about from time to time, because I did this when I was a kid, before a lot of this took off. But read Isaac Asimov's books about robots. They predicted an awful lot of this stuff, and the challenges and the ethics and the moral dilemmas and all these sorts of things. I think they're very relevant today, more relevant in some ways than when they were created in the 20th century. I didn't realize what I was reading when I was a kid would actually happen in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's interesting going back to the Foundation series and thinking about, how that is actually playing out.
Yeah, absolutely. There were some deviations from that are important. But I mean, I work with different generations in my job, and the younger generations that are coming in, well, they've got all sorts of challenges. They've got economic challenges that I didn't have. But one of the things I've said to new graduates coming in is, you have many more avenues to learn now. Again, going back to my point about you can not only can you research information faster using AI, but you can get it to teach you and test you. I don't think enough people really understand how far that can go. Again, I suspect that will probably change quite soon. We've already had revolution with far more training available online, and sometimes of better quality than even at universities. I think that will continue. Information democratization, if that's the right word. Yeah, I think it can become easier for everyone to learn.
I really like the idea of that you planted this thought about being in a two-way relationship with the AI. A lot of it is we kind of put the questions in, expect the answers to come out, but actually asking it to ask you questions. That's a kind of new thought for me. Can you give us a sense of the kind of things that we might start to ask it to ask of ourselves?
So, well, from my own investigations, anything that I want to learn about, I'll ask it some questions to get a sense of how much it knows and if it can solve some small useful problems. And then I'll say, right, test my knowledge, or write me a test, write me an exam test my knowledge, or we'll co-design something. That type of thing can work. Another thing that one can do is to ask it to present knowledge at different levels. So you can say, give me a 10-year-old school child's version of this, give me a 15-year-old, 20-year-old university, undergraduate, postgraduate, whatever. You can scale up and down with what it's explained to you. And again, you can flip that switch then and get it to test you in those ways. So you can get it to scale knowledge up or scale its expectations up. And you can get it to design tests and examples for you. Always, if you get more specific and more detailed in your questions, it will typically get better in its answers, so long as it's not hallucinating. I think if you've got a completely blank slate in an area, it's quite hard to get the best value out of the models, because again, like with just traditional search engines, you don't have any clue what questions to ask. It's useful to have some initial training. You know, if you really didn't know an area, try and get some initial training in a more old-fashioned way, and then start working with the machines. You've got enough base context to know what to ask. I think that's a useful area, because in areas where I know quite a lot about, I can refine my knowledge and research very quickly, and I can jump out along my knowledge graph and follow along with it and collaborate with it. But yeah, if I don't know where to start, then, well, I just don't know where to start, do I?
Well, a human being, if you ask the human being to say, give me a quick start guide and tell me everything I need to know about it, the human being's got a context for that, and it's got an opinion, a judgment, and a feeling about who you are. And so that information comes with empathy and consciousness and self-awareness and so on. Whereas the machine doesn't have any of that at all. So it doesn't.
Well, that's not totally true, though, is it?
Oh, okay. Give me
because no, but see that again, it's such an interesting point. This, I think it's accurate to say that the machine doesn't have technically its own view or consciousness or ethics or whatever, but it does have what we trained it on.
Yeah,
and that's the point. So the company or organization that did the pre-training will entirely bias the model. Yes. Possibly for its whole lifetime.
So it has bias, yes.
Oh, bias is a huge, we haven't even really talked about that, have we? Yeah. Yes, bias is a massive issue, and a lot has been researched and written about that. There's bias in the internet in general, right? I mean, if one just browses around Wikipedia, right, which is a great source of knowledge, I'm a huge fan of Wikipedia, but it's still quite biased, though. It has a very mainstream view. It will simply block out certain unfashionable ideas, whether or not that's really correct. So there's sort of a mainstream bias. Well, I see the same mainstream bias in the large GPT models, because they were trained on it. If you ask questions of the general internet, it will go to Wikipedia for a lot of stuff. So is it really that different? And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, right? It's just, I mean, there's so-called wisdom of the crowd, right? There's a mainstream bias is probably right most of the time, but there'll be outliers that people miss that is the next theory of everything, right? So it still goes back to, well, make sure one's own critical thinking, testing oneself, being creative, being open-minded is as important as ever. That hasn't really changed, because the machine is the tool. I think of the models as a representation of human knowledge, because that is kind of what they are, right? They were trained on, I mean, it's nobody else's internet. We built the internet, right? And then we trained the machines on the internet, and then they start training themselves a bit, but there isn't any other information coming in.
No, and I think, you know, if you were, I was trying to draw the kind of like the thought process a bit further. So if you were talking to somebody who you admired from a knowledge point of view, but you knew that person had zero self-awareness, you would adapt your way of.
You would call them ChatGPT.
No, well, they would never be that extreme, but that you would judge their answers differently than you would with somebody with a heightened sense of self-awareness, who is naturally processing their thoughts in context of you. They're paying attention to how you might respond to it and so on. It would be a different experience. Yeah. So, I'm just pushing at the, you know, like, what's the skill set that we need to adopt in shifting our thinking around relating to something that has no self-awareness. That's quite an interesting challenge when we start to try and project our human values onto something like this that we might become so dependent on in the future.
Absolutely. And my initial answer is, first of all, know ourselves better, because that's always important. Self-knowledge, self-awareness, for sure. And then, like I previously mentioned, understand. You don't have to understand hyper-technical knowledge about how these models work. I think I've outlined some of the general principles and ideas. Think of them as knowledge amalgamations and like predictive creative engines. That it's called generative AI, but whether generative is actually an accurate term, I'm not totally decided on, because they do generate things, but it's not the same as a human artist, right? I mean, there was a lot of fuss, wasn't there, in the early days when we had all this image generation coming out. Look, they've produced incredible works of art, until people started to realize that, well, actually what they've done is just smushed together a lot of human great works of art in a way that is unique, but it's kind of cheating. It's like they didn't actually create something new. They just amalgamated a lot of things, which is nowhere near the same thing.
They all have the same kind of eerie quality that makes you kind of feel slightly uneasy.
Yeah, but and the brilliant. I've seen some amazing paintings that were generated, which you know, following the prompt to generate the images, DALL-E and all this sort of technology, right? Draw me a picture of, you know, people in this room and they're doing this and they're holding these objects and in the style of such and such a human artist. It comes up with something amazing, but one of the people in the picture has 6 fingers on their hand, and I mean, it's almost beautiful what it's produced, but it has no comprehension of what a hand is, though. It has no reference to the material world in that sense. I don't actually know what's happened to things, though, because there was a huge amount of fuss about that sort of thing 2 years ago, and it's all seems to have disappeared from the mainstream media. I'm sure there's a lot of research still going on. I haven't looked so much in the image generation side of things, but there's a lot of the technology is quite similar to the language generation. Not exactly, but it is quite similar. So a lot of the situation will be, I think, at least similar from what I know.
If the conversations we've been having on The Evolving Leader have helped you in any way, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. Thank you for listening. Now let's get back to the conversation.
What's your next challenge? What are you excited about? Where are you learning and developing your work?
With AI specifically, I'm interested in the improvements that are in the works with the models, particularly their ability to get better at abstract reasoning, because that's still quite a deficit area in the models at the moment.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So one of the areas where I've seen useful outputs do that kind of flip that I described from being really useful to being nonsense is where they might have kept up with the general context of the question insofar as it understands, but it simply fails to build the equivalent of a mental model in the way that humans do for a complex problem. So it suddenly starts saying things where you're thinking, well, there's no, I mean, literally illogical statement. It starts off being really clever and really insightful. And you end up thinking, oh, you just repeated some book knowledge. And when I went past the end of the book and said, well, I'm trying to design something new, it just talks, I mean, properly nonsense. I'm not talking about it's a bit wrong. Starts making statements that are patently illogical. And then you say to it, that doesn't make sense. That is illogical. Can you see why? Oh, yes, good point. And then it just repeats the same wrong answer. I've had that problem multiple times in complex. Less now because I know to not even bother, but it's kind of a shame. But that I'm pretty sure from what I've seen from research that is likely to improve. And part of it would be brute force, just having models with more parameters and stuffing more data in, but it's not just as simple as that. We need more nuance than that. That's something that I'm very interested in. How can we make the models smarter, not just kind of stronger? Because there's a lot of just put more data in them, just put more compute power in them. it's looking like there may be some limits to how much they can improve with doing that. We might hit a plateau where they don't actually get that much better for years, or we might not. I'm very interested to see what will happen with that.
Yeah, there's been some predictions on that, haven't there, that we're fast approaching that point. But as we know with these kind of things, you can never be sure.
No, you can't never be sure. And it's so big. There's so many people involved with it all over the world, doing so many things, as well as so many machines now contributing in their own way, making things better and or worse. So yeah, it's a fascinating area to watch.
Well, Damien, this has been a wonderful conversation. And I think those people listening into the show will have gained some new perspectives and probably increase their awareness of the opportunity to improve their interactions with AI and start to build this mindset and skill set of how to coexist successfully or more productively and satisfyingly with this new technology. So we're really grateful for the time you've spent talking to us, and wish you well in your endeavours to make this technology even better for all of us. So thank you. And listeners, until the next time, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?